Hi, I'm Dorian. My family told me I wasn't invited to my sister's wedding because it was just for close family. A week later, she called yelling at me to pay the rent, the same rent I'd been covering for years. They didn't just cut me out of a ceremony, they erased me, slowly, quietly, from everything. From the lease, from the will, from the truth. And the worst part? They did it with smiles on their faces and forged signatures behind my back. But I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I was planning what silence would sound like when it finally spoke for itself. What they never expected was that silence could win. So, you want to know what happened when the truth came knocking? The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, rich and grounding. I stood barefoot on the cool tile, the sunlight slanting through the blinds in gold stripes. Grandma Gloria's plants on the windowsill looked more alive than I felt. Mornings like this were usually my sanctuary, a slow ritual before the noise of the day. I poured 2 cups, one for me, one for her. Our apartment wasn't much, but it had its corners of comfort. A photo of Mom and Dad from the 80s hung crooked near the fridge. The kind of thing I hadn't had the heart to take down. I sat on the couch, legs tucked under me, phone in hand. Just a few taps into social media, a casual scroll, and there it was. Rowena, my sister, my parents, my cousin Evan. Everyone smiling under a pale pink canopy of roses. A caption sat beneath the picture like it was nothing. Only close family. The cup trembled slightly in my hand. Steam rose, then disappeared. For a moment, everything around me froze. No clinking cups, no humming from the fridge. Just a stillness, the kind that seeps into your chest like cold water. They didn't even tell us it had happened. Not even a polite lie. Behind me, I felt Gloria's presence before I heard her steps. She always moved slow, but that morning, it felt even slower. Like she was measuring the air. She leaned down gently and looked at my screen. Her hand rested on my shoulder, warm and soft, the way only she could be. She didn't gasp. Didn't say, "Oh, honey." Instead, she said it like a fact. They make you smaller so they can feel taller. I didn't know what to say to that. My throat felt dry. My chest burned. I managed to whisper, "Guess we weren't close family after all." She just stood there a moment longer, then walked away, back to her crossword puzzle, like she'd seen this kind of hurt before, too many times to cry about it now. The screen dimmed. I let the phone fall face down on the couch. But memory doesn't need a screen. I remembered the last winter Rowena's boutique almost went under. Rent unpaid, utilities shut off, panic setting in. It was me, not Mom, not Dad, who paid the landlord that same afternoon. I dipped into my savings, the one I never talked about. I remembered her crying, saying, "I'll pay you back when I can." She never did. There were birthdays where I showed up with gifts for everyone, and no one asked if I had dinner. Christmas mornings where my name wasn't even under the tree, but my signature was on half the boxes. "You're the dependable one, Dorian. You don't need attention." That line was supposed to be a compliment, but all it ever did was teach me to stay invisible. Useful, but unseen. I moved toward the window. My chair, the one I always claimed, was there, a little worn, facing the street. I sat down slowly. Gloria peeked around the corner and smiled. "You always take the seat by the window. You like to see the world, even when it doesn't see you." I smiled back, barely. Didn't have the energy to answer. The window was cracked slightly, letting in the soft buzz of a late Texas summer. Somewhere a lawnmower started and a bird landed on the railing just outside. Normal things, small things, things that didn't lie. Then my phone rang. Rowena. I stared at the name for a few seconds before picking up. Her voice came sharp, clipped, like she was already annoyed. Did you forget to pay the rent this month? No hello, no, how are you? I blinked. Excuse me? The boutique's landlord just called. The rent's overdue. You handle this every month, remember? I paused, let the silence stretch just long enough to feel heavy, then said it, calm and clear. Didn't you say the wedding was for close family only? Her silence on the line buzzed louder than her voice ever could. Then ask them for help. I hung up. There was no satisfaction in it, no release, just the soft whistle of the coffee pot behind me. Gloria didn't speak. She just looked at me, eyes knowing, patient. I set the phone down beside my coffee, both untouched now. My voice came out low, but steady. Guess it's time to stop being useful. I thought hanging up would be the end of it, but the next morning, as the sun poured into the kitchen just like it had the day before, I found a note slipped under the front door. The paper was folded neatly in thirds, like she'd taken the time to make it look civil. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. Dorian, I'm counting on you. The landlord called me. It's your name on the lease. Don't let this become a problem. No greeting, no signature, just expectation. I stood there for a minute, the note in my hand, still warm from the morning air. I placed it next to my mug and stared at it like it might rewrite itself if I waited long enough. The coffee didn't taste right today. Too bitter, too cold, too fast. Gloria sat at the kitchen table, sewing something with that old blue thread she always used. Her glasses were low on her nose, and her hands moved slowly, but sure. You ever notice, she said without looking up, how some people think kindness is a bottomless well? I didn't answer. They'll draw from it till they dry you out, she added, tying a knot in the fabric. I let out a short breath. Guess I'm the family's well then. She paused, looked at me. No, baby. You're the pump they broke years ago and still expect water from. That one hit harder than I expected. I gave a half smile, then excused myself, telling her I needed to walk it off. But what I really needed was to clear my head. It had been 2 weeks since Rowena called me in a rush, voice sweet and high-pitched. Can you do me a quick favor? She said, like it was nothing. Just swing by and pick up my dress for the wedding. I can't make it, and you're closer. No big deal, I told myself. Just being helpful. Again. When I walked into the boutique, the place smelled like expensive perfume and lemon polish. I gave Rowena's name to the receptionist. A minute later, someone behind the counter called out loud enough for the whole store to hear, "The delivery boy's here." A couple of women near the fitting room chuckled. I waited for the correction, for someone, anyone, to say, "That's her brother." But all I heard was Rowena's laughter through the speakerphone. "Thanks, Dorian. You're a lifesaver," she said, then hung up. I carried that damn dress bag out like it was on fire. Didn't even realize how tight I'd been clenching my jaw until I got back to the car and my molars ached. That moment stuck. The way they all looked through me, like I was paid help. Worse than that, like I wasn't worth a name. Back at home that night, Gloria sat me down and showed me something she'd been working on for weeks. A napkin, small, delicate, the kind you don't actually use. Embroidered by hand in soft gold thread, it read, "Family First." She smiled. "It's for Rowena's reception table. Something special from me." I nodded. "I'll deliver it." And I did. The next day, I dropped it off at our parents' house. Mom opened the door, took the napkin without even looking at it. "That's sweet," she muttered, "but it doesn't match the color theme." She set it on a side table, and when I turned to leave, I saw it fall, slip right off the edge and land face down on the floor. No one picked it up. I didn't say anything, just walked out like it hadn't happened. But that tiny moment made more noise in my chest than all the years of yelling ever did. That night, I came back to the apartment and collapsed onto the couch. Gloria was asleep already, her quilt pulled up to her chin. I watched the ceiling fan spin, slow and steady, and thought about every task I'd taken on without complaint. The rent, the dress, the napkin, the phone calls, the wiring of money, the excuses I made for their silence. I taught them that I was always available, that I would say yes no matter what. I made myself easy to forget. "You teach people how to treat you," I whispered to no one, and I taught them I'd never say no. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and opened my laptop to distract myself, but the first thing that popped up on my feed stopped me cold. Rowena's wedding live stream, or at least a replay. Over 200 people, a dance floor, champagne towers, laughter. Even our third cousins from Florida were there. The caption read, "Family means everything." I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. Then, softly, almost without breath, I asked, "Then why did you erase me?" I shut the laptop and sat there for a long while, staring at my reflection in the black screen. My own face looked unfamiliar, tired, older somehow. The silence of the apartment pressed in like humidity. Outside, Houston buzzed faintly with weekday traffic, people going about their lives, none of them carrying the weight of someone else's family. A week passed. I thought maybe the noise had died down, that Rowena would stew quietly in her own pride. I was wrong. That Friday morning, I was rinsing out the coffee pot when my phone started buzzing on the counter. I didn't have to check the screen. "Did you forget to pay it?" Her voice hit my ear sharp and practiced, like she'd been rehearsing the line. "The rent's overdue, Dorian. The landlord's been calling me all morning." I let the water run, the hiss of the faucet cutting through her tone. Then I said it, calm even. I didn't forget. I decided not to. There was a pause, long enough that I could hear her breathing shift. Then came the disbelief. "What? You can't just... Dorian, this isn't funny." "I'm not laughing." She inhaled sharply, and when she spoke again, the warmth was gone. "You're being petty. It's rent. You're making things worse for everyone." I turned off the faucet, dried my hands. "You called it a small family event, remember? I just adjusted my definition of family." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, full of everything we'd never said. Then, a click. She hung up. I stood there for a moment, waiting for the guilt to crash in. It didn't, not right away. What I felt first was lightness. The strange weightlessness of saying no for the first time. But underneath it, something deeper stirred. Fear. I'd broken the unspoken rule. The dependable one doesn't quit. I paced the kitchen, counting my steps between the counter and the fridge. Gloria sat nearby, mending one of her old scarves. She didn't look up when she said, "Pride and peace sound similar at first. You'll learn the difference later." I leaned against the counter. "You think this is pride?" "I think you finally stopped mistaking obedience for kindness." That shut me up. After she went to lie down, I stayed in the kitchen, half lost in memory. It wasn't the first time I'd covered someone's bill. When Rowena got into college, Dad called me one afternoon. "She's short on her deposit," he said. "You can spot her, right? That's what older brothers do." I'm not older, I'd said, half laughing, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. To him, responsibility had nothing to do with age, just with who wouldn't say no. I wired the money that day. She never said thank you. No one did. It was like my help erased itself the moment it left my hands. Now, years later, I was realizing the truth. They'd trained me well. My phone buzzed again that evening. An email this time. Subject line: "Don't embarrass us." I opened it, scrolled through paragraphs about family reputation, responsibility, and what people will think. I reached the end without really reading most of it. My eyes lingered on the last line. "Don't make us look bad." I deleted it. My voice came out quiet, almost to myself. I already look invisible. Can't get worse than that. The next morning, I made coffee and sat by the window. The sunlight hit the kitchen table just right, warming the spot where the mail usually piled up. Among the envelopes, one stood out, cream-colored, addressed to me in neat handwriting. Rent bill. I didn't open it. Instead, I set my coffee cup on top of it. The steam rose in slow, curling patterns, blurring the letters of my name. It felt symbolic somehow, hiding what they thought mattered most under something simple, human. The rest of the day moved quietly. Gloria hummed an old tune while she cooked, and I pretended to read the paper. My phone stayed face down. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Families like mine never let silence stay quiet for long. They'll call it concern, but it's always control. They'll say, "We just want what's best." But what they mean is, do as we say. I looked out the window. The afternoon light had turned golden, stretching across the floor in thin lines. "They'll come knocking soon," I whispered, and I knew I was right. Sunday morning came quiet, the way it always does in our neighborhood. Birdsong bleeding through the blinds, the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the apartment. I just started buttering toast when the phone rang. I stared at it for a few seconds. Mom's name glowed on the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Her voice came through soft, syrupy. "Hi, honey. How are you holding up? You know, with everything." There was a pause, as if waiting for me to rescue her from having to name what everything meant. Before I could say anything, she moved in closer. "Sweetheart, Rowena is under so much pressure. You know how delicate she's always been. Her nerves aren't like yours. She's trying her best. Can't you just help one last time?" I rested the phone on my shoulder, leaning over the counter. "Help with what, Mom?" "She said the boutique lease. It's still in your name, and you've always—" I cut her off, voice flat but controlled. She had 200 people at that wedding. Champagne tower, live band, a horse-drawn entrance. And I didn't even get a text, not a seat at the table. The line went quiet. Then she exhaled slowly, disappointment curling at the edges. "Don't make this about you." There it was, that phrase again, that line that shut every door I'd ever wanted to open. She didn't wait for my response. She didn't hang up either. The silence was her closing argument. No shouting, no pleading, just wait and guilt. When I finally said, "Okay," it wasn't an agreement. It was an ending. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and didn't pick it back up. Grandma Gloria was folding laundry at the table nearby. She hadn't looked up once, but her ears never missed a beat. "They use that word family like a key," she said, smoothing a dish towel. "And you keep opening the door like the lock still works." I leaned on the counter, staring into my half-eaten toast. It's supposed to mean something good, isn't it? Gloria gave a small shrug. It used to. Before it became a contract written in your handwriting, not theirs. Her words stuck with me the rest of the morning. Later, I found myself in my room, cleaning out an old drawer. Inside was a postcard from years ago, still unsent. I had written it during a vacation I never took. That trip, the one I canceled last minute, had been my first planned time off in years. Instead, I'd driven down to Dallas to help Dad with a tax issue for his business. I remembered him standing in the doorway of his study afterward, barely looking up. You're part of the family, aren't you? You do what's needed. That was it. No thanks. No recognition. Just that line. A leash dressed up as loyalty. The longer I thought about it, the clearer it became. In our family, your family didn't mean we love you. It meant you owe us. That afternoon, as the lights started to fade, my phone buzzed again. A message from Rowena. Family dinner this Sunday. Just immediate family. Probably best if you sit this one out. Could get awkward. My jaw tightened. Immediate family, I muttered. The phrase echoed in my ears. Same words. New knife. I walked into the living room, handed the phone to Gloria. She adjusted her glasses, read the message, and handed it back. They're writing you out one dinner at a time, she said quietly. I didn't answer. I deleted the message. I didn't forward it. Didn't reply. No sarcasm, no clapback. I turned off the phone entirely. If silence is what they hear from me, I said aloud, let it be silence with meaning. The next few hours were still. No calls, no texts, just me, Gloria, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. That night, after Gloria went to bed, I sat at the desk by the window, the same desk where I used to write out grocery lists and payment reminders for them. I opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years. Flipping past blank pages, I found a clean one. And I wrote one line. They built their walls with my money. Time to take back the bricks. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like a beginning. The kind that doesn't come with fireworks. Just clarity. The first sentence I'd written for myself in years. Not for work. Not for family. Not for fixing anyone's life. Just mine. The next morning, I got up without checking my phone. No calendar reminders, no unread messages. I brewed coffee slowly, watching the light creep across the kitchen tiles. 3 days since the family dinner I wasn't invited to. 3 days of uninterrupted quiet. No one called, no one texted. At first, it felt like a bruise I kept pressing on, waiting to see if it still hurt. But then, something shifted. There was a strange relief in the stillness. I was sleeping through the night. My jaw didn't ache from clenching. Even my coffee tasted better, maybe because I wasn't gulping it between obligations. Still, beneath that peace, there was an echo I couldn't ignore. Not pain exactly, just absence. Not being needed used to feel like failure. Now it felt like air. I wrote in my notebook, sometimes the quiet isn't peace. It's just the sound after the storm. Around noon, the guilt campaign began. It started with Aunt Caroline. She hadn't called in months, not even for my birthday. But now, her name popped up on the screen, blinking like a lighthouse in fog. I picked up. Dorian, hi, sweetheart, she said, stretching the word as if we'd last spoken yesterday. Just wanted to check in. You know, family fights don't last forever. We all say things we don't mean. Maybe just be the bigger man? I pressed the phone against my shoulder and looked out the window. Houston heat made the sidewalk shimmer. I already was, I said calmly. That's how they managed to walk over me. There was a pause. I heard her swallow. Then the line went quiet. Later that evening, I got an email from Dad. Subject line, "Let's talk." It read, "You embarrassed your sister. This isn't how we raised you." I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "No, it's exactly how you raised me. To fix things that weren't my fault, and stay quiet when they were." I hit send and shut my laptop. No hesitation this time. That night, Gloria noticed me quieter than usual. She sat across the table, nursing her tea, watching me like a weather vane. "They're making you feel like you've broken the family," she said. I didn't answer. She reached over, poured more coffee into my cup, and added gently, "But you're not breaking the family, Dorian. You're breaking the pattern." That landed hard. It didn't make the ache go away, but it made it make sense. Later, while putting away old papers from the bookshelf, a memory floated up, clear as a photograph. I was 12. It was a Thursday, I think. Dad was supposed to pick me up from school. He didn't show. I waited on the curb until the last teacher locked up the building, walked 1.5 miles home, thinking maybe there'd been an emergency. When I opened the front door, Dad looked up from the TV and said, "You should have found your way. You're smart." No apology, no concern. That was the day I learned something I'd never unlearned in our house. Love was something you earned by being useful. And if you couldn't be used, you didn't exist. By the time the sky turned dark, that weight settled in again. I found myself in the same spot as always, chair by the window. The neighborhood lights flickered on, casting pale reflections across the glass. I whispered to no one. They don't see me unless I'm helping. It wasn't an accusation, just a truth, a tired one. I didn't cry loud, I didn't collapse, but the tears came anyway. The quiet kind, slow and steady. The kind that came from places you didn't know were still sore. The kind that didn't ask permission. I stayed there a long while, letting it all run its course. When it passed, I breathed deep. Then I wiped my eyes, stood up, walked over to the desk, and opened my notebook. On a fresh page, I wrote, "If silence is my crime, I'll make it count." I closed the cover slowly, like sealing something in. Across the glass, the city lights blinked back at me. Faint, but steady. I didn't know it then, but my silence was starting to echo louder than their words. It filled the spaces they used to occupy. Phone calls I didn't return. Texts I didn't answer. Invitations I never got. And for once, it didn't feel like losing. It felt like something was finally shifting. By Friday evening, I was in the middle of cleaning the sink when the knock came. Not a polite tap. It was sharp, urgent, like someone trying to remind me they still had a key to my peace. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door, and opened it. Rowena stood there, clutching the rent bill like it was a summons to court. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes burned. "You're ruining my reputation, Dorian. Do you even care?" she snapped. "The landlord called me again. Everyone thinks I can't manage my own business." I kept my voice level. "Then maybe stop managing mine." Her jaw clenched. "You're acting like some martyr, like we all owe you something." I looked at her, not the designer coat, not the wedding band she never used to wear, just her face, tired, painted with fury, and under it, fear. "No," I said softly. "Just someone who stopped funding his own disrespect." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, crowded with all the things we never said. Then, as quickly as she came in swinging, her tone shifted. Her posture softened. She tilted her head like we were children again. "I didn't mean to hurt you, okay?" she said, voice suddenly sweet. "It was just logistics. You know how family stuff gets messy. Seating charts, budgets, things change fast." I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Complicated for who? You or your conscience?" Her mouth opened, then closed. For once, she didn't have a comeback. The quiet sat between us, finally hers to hold, not mine. But the moment didn't last. "You've always resented me," she said, her voice rising again. "You've always wanted to make me look bad." I laughed, short and sharp. Not because it was funny, but because it was so wildly wrong. It bordered on comedy. "No," I said, eyes locked on hers. "I wanted you to look at me. At all." And there it was, the real fracture. Not rent, not money. Just the raw truth of being erased. She blinked fast, like trying to erase the words from the air. But they'd landed. Footsteps creaked behind me. Grandma Gloria stepped in from the hallway, her cardigan draped over one shoulder, needlework forgotten in her hand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't take sides. She simply looked at Rowena and said, "You can't guilt a man into love, dear. You can only remind him what it should have meant." Rowena stood frozen. Eyes darted between me and Gloria, but she didn't reply. Her hands tightened on the bill, then loosened. She turned without another word and walked out, heels clicking down the stairs. I waited until the front door closed behind her. Then I slowly pushed, mine shut. No slam, no drama. I sat back in my chair by the window, the same one I always came back to. But tonight, it didn't feel like a retreat. It felt like a choice. The quiet in the room was rich, earned, no longer heavy, just mine. For the first time, my quiet wasn't weakness. It was a boundary. The evening dragged into night. I made tea, read 2 pages of a novel I couldn't finish, tried not to check my phone. But around 11, it buzzed. I hesitated, then reached for it. An email from Jacobs & Price LLP subject, property lease reassignment. I clicked it open, and as I read, the air in my lungs turned stale. They were trying to remove my name from the lease. No call, no conversation, just paperwork. Silent and surgical. So this was the next move. I stared at the screen. My reflection hovered in the glass, tired, but steady. I whispered, "So that's how it is." The next battle wouldn't be about rent. It would be about erasing me completely. By Monday afternoon, the weight of the email still sat heavy in my chest. I'd reread it at least 10 times, hoping I'd misinterpreted, hoping some legal phrasing would twist in my favor. It never did. There it was in plain language. The lease for the property I'd paid on for over a decade was being reassigned. Not sold, not negotiated. Quietly reassigned under a new business entity registered to Rowena. My name was gone. No request, no heads up. Just gone. I scrolled through the PDF attachments. Pages of documents filled with numbers and clauses and notarized stamps. One signature after another. None of them mine, but one of them pretending to be. "They didn't even try to hide it," I muttered. Behind me, Grandma Gloria leaned in and read over my shoulder. Her breath caught. "They're not ashamed anymore, Dorian," she said. "That's the part that hurts." She didn't sound surprised, just tired. I closed the laptop quietly. No yelling, no rage, just stillness. I stood, walked into the next room, and pulled out the printer from the cabinet. Loaded paper, plugged it in, hit print. Page after page came out. Not just the lease reassignment, but emails from landlords, bank statements showing years of payments in my name, tax forms. All those late-night money transfers I used to make without being asked. I printed them all. Every dollar, every receipt, every silence. I organized the pages into a neat folder, labeled it simply, Proof. Then I placed the folder into the bottom drawer of my desk and locked it. I stepped outside into the warm Houston air, walked aimlessly, let my mind stretch out further than the tension in my chest. They taught me to stay quiet, I thought. They just forgot I could listen, too. The sun dipped behind the buildings as I turned the corner back toward home. When I walked up the porch, Rowena was already there, leaning against the railing like she owned it, which, technically, she was now trying to do. She held her phone in one hand, eyes flicking toward me like she'd been waiting. "You saw the email?" she asked flatly. "I did," she sighed, loud enough to make it seem like she was the one carrying the weight. "Look, don't make this messier than it needs to be. It's just business, Dorian. You don't even use that space." I stared at her for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her confidence to flicker. "You said I wasn't family," I said. "Now you're calling it business?" I stepped past her toward the door. "Fine," I said. "Let's keep it that way." I left her there, halfway through whatever justification she thought I was still desperate to hear. She didn't follow. Later that night, I sat across from Gloria in the kitchen. She had just brewed a pot of tea. The scent of chamomile filled the space between us. I stirred a spoon absent-mindedly, watching the swirl fade. "If I fight this," I said finally, "I'll lose what's left of them." She placed her hand on the table, calm and firm. "If you don't," she replied, "you'll lose yourself." I nodded once, slowly. "Maybe," she added, "losing them is how you find you." By midnight, I was back at my desk, not for reflection, for work. I opened every folder, pulled out every old record, traced every dollar I'd ever contributed. It wasn't revenge I was building. It was truth. Cold, meticulous, undeniable. I didn't play music, didn't answer texts, just let the hum of the printer become rhythm. Soft, steady, like a heartbeat. By the time dawn began tracing the window, I had it all laid out. A full ledger of loyalty. I stacked the papers, slid them into a thick envelope, sealed it shut, labeled it the same way. Proof. As I placed the folder back into the drawer and turned the lock, my phone buzzed on the table. "Rowena, text message. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I stared at it, then typed slowly, "So are you." No emoji, no punctuation, just the truth, flat and clear. I powered off the phone, placed its screen down beside me, and whispered, "Next time they hear from me, it won't be a conversation." What came next wasn't shouting or threats. It was the quiet kind of justice that speaks for itself. 2 days after Rowena's text, I walked into the law office downtown with my spine straight and folder in hand. The receptionist greeted me with the kind of forced smile people save for sterile buildings and uncomfortable meetings. She asked if I wanted coffee. I didn't. The conference room was already half filled. Rowena sat at one end of the long oak table, legs crossed, phone in hand. Her eyes met mine for only a second before glancing away. She wore a blazer like armor, but her fingers twitched against the paper cup in front of her. The lawyer introduced himself, mid-50s, gray at the temples, tie too tight. "Mr. Shaw," he said, gesturing to a seat across from Rowena. "Glad you could make it." On the monitor at the end of the table, my father's face flickered to life. He was remote, of course, his way of maintaining control without presence. "Dorian," he said curtly, "let's get this settled quickly." I nodded once and sat. Before anyone spoke further, I opened my leather folder and slid the sealed envelope across the table. "You might want to start with this," I said evenly. The lawyer looked surprised, but took it. He opened the envelope, adjusted his glasses, and began flipping through the stack. Transaction histories, scanned lease agreements, emails, bank transfers, tax forms, all of them in my name, all signed by me. Not a word was spoken for a solid minute, just the faint rustle of paper and the clink of Rowena's spoon as she stirred coffee she wasn't drinking. Then the color drained from her face. The lawyer cleared his throat. "These documents show consistent financial responsibility tied to Mr. Shaw, including payments well before the current lease re-registration." My father frowned. This isn't necessary." I looked at him through the screen. "Neither was the wedding invite list," I said. Rowena's jaw clenched. The lawyer went on, professional but firm. "Legally, unless Mr. Shaw authorized this transfer, any changes to property control are invalid. In fact, they may constitute misrepresentation." Rowena's voice cracked like a branch. "You planned this. You knew exactly what you were doing." I didn't raise my voice, didn't smile, just met her eyes. "No," I said. "You taught me how." She blinked once, then looked down. That was the moment everything shifted. No one argued. No one yelled. The truth sat in the middle of the table, heavier than anything else in the room. The meeting ended quietly. My father disconnected without another word. The lawyer collected the documents. Rowena left without saying goodbye. That evening, I returned home, the folder back under my arm. Gloria was in the kitchen, as usual. She'd already poured 2 cups of tea. Same mugs as always. The faded floral ones from when I was a kid. I sat across from her, the warm cup between my palms. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to. "You sound like yourself again," she said softly, after a while. I nodded, eyes still on the steam rising from the tea. "Maybe for the first time," I said. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. There were no more calls, no texts, no knock at the door. I had braced for grief, the kind that creeps in through silence. But instead, there was clarity. Not joy, not pain, just space. They erased me on paper, I thought, but I erased their power in silence. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like breathing after holding your breath too long. 4 days later, a letter arrived in the mailbox. No return address, no stamp beyond the standard one. Inside was a single piece of paper. 1 line in Rowena's handwriting. I never meant for it to go this far. I sat on the porch with the letter in hand for a long while. Then I folded it carefully and slid it into my notebook, tucked behind the page labeled proof. "Some truths," I whispered, "don't need answers. Just endings. Justice gave me peace, but peace came with a price I didn't expect. It's been a month since the meeting at the lawyer's office. A month since the papers were signed, since the calls stopped, since everything fell silent. The house has never been quieter. Not just quiet in the literal sense, but that kind of quiet where even the furniture feels like it's waiting for someone to speak. I thought I'd feel triumphant, and I did, for about a minute. Then that sense of vindication gave way to something else I hadn't prepared for. Stillness, not grief, not guilt, just space. I sat by the kitchen table one afternoon, leafing through unopened mail, and caught myself thinking, so this is what winning looks like. No one from the family had reached out. Not my father, not Rowena. Even the lawyer who once copied me on every correspondence stopped emailing altogether. Winning felt good for a minute, I admitted once to Gloria as we folded laundry together. Then it just stopped feeling at all. She didn't respond right away, just kept folding, slow and steady. That evening, we sat on the porch together, just like we had dozens of times before. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and cut grass. She hummed softly, the same tune she used to hum while washing dishes when I was a boy. She handed me a cup of tea, same old mug with the chipped rim. "People think forgiveness is for them," she said, eyes on the sunset bleeding across the Houston sky. "It's not. It's for you, so you can stop carrying what they dropped." I looked down at the tea in my hands and nodded. Later that night, I pulled out my notebook. I wrote a letter, short and plain. "Rowena, I meant what I said, and I also wish you well. I hope you're okay." I folded it neatly, didn't seal it, didn't address it. Instead, I slid it into the back of the notebook, right next to the old rent bill. Both now just paper, no longer weapons, no longer weight. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. That simple act felt like setting something down I'd been carrying for too long. The next few days passed quietly. I cooked, I read, I walked more. And somewhere between cleaning out the garage and fixing the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, it hit me. Silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means space. Sometimes it means peace. I used to think silence meant I'd lost my voice. Turns out, it was where I found it. Weeks later, Gloria passed in her sleep. Peaceful. No pain. I found her that morning in her recliner. Blanket pulled up to her chest, book still resting in her lap. The memorial was small. A few neighbors. A couple of friends from her church group. No family. None of the ones who shared our blood. But the ones who came? They brought casseroles, stories, old photos, and warm hands that rested on my shoulder. I brought her favorite teacup to the urn, placed it beside her like a final offering. "You were right," I whispered. "Some families are built, not born." That night, after everyone had left, I walked back into the house. The rooms felt hollow, but not lonely. I climbed the stairs slowly, turned left into my bedroom, and opened the window. The same one I'd sat beside that first night when everything started unraveling. The city buzzed in the distance. Cars moved like fireflies below. And me, I just stood there. No anger, no ache, just quiet. I used to think being excluded was the worst thing that could happen. I whispered into the night. Turns out, it was the first time I was truly free. I closed my eyes, breathing deep, steady. They called it a small family. I just made mine smaller and stronger.